Welcome to the Fort Myers Beach Good Neighbor Podcast and the Estero Island Historic Society series, where we preserve and share the stories that shaped Fort Myers Beach, tracing the island's journey from Calusa roots to fishing village to beloved tourist destination. In each episode, we gather local voices, forgotten moments, and living memories to keep Estero Island's past bright on the shoreline of today. So settle in and listen closely, because on this island, even the sea breeze has a story to tell.
Welcome to our Historical Society series, the Estero Island Historical Society series. We've got Janet and Ellie, and we're going to go through a series of podcasts, kind of adventuring through the time and history of Estero Island and Fort Myers Beach. So let's start off. I guess we're going to start from the beginning, right?
Well, I think we should start from the beginning.
Good idea.
Not everybody realizes that Fort Myers Beach didn't exist probably 12,000 years ago. There was no Fort Myers Beach.
Really?
But the west coast of Florida extended probably about 40 miles beyond where it is now.
Really?
And then with ice ages and various changes in climate and geological plates, gradually there was a formation of, I think it started as a mangrove island. Really? And then sand accreted, and lo and behold, there was Fort Myers Beach, a little barrier island.
Growing and growing.
Kept growing. And the first humans were probably here around 2,000 years ago. They were known as the Calusa people.
Okay.
And they were natives who may have come from, they may have been descended from or related to the Mayans of central and southern Mexico, or possibly from the West Indies. And they would have arrived by boat, by raft. We're not really sure of their origins. But they established their fiefdom in Southwest Florida, and they extended all the way from around Tampa down to basically south of the 10,000 Islands, including this area, Fort Myers Beach, and all the way east to Lake Okeechobee. They were the dominant people of this area for quite a few centuries.
Now, were they a big tribe?
They were, well, we're not really sure what the population was, but they certainly appreciated the seafood and seashells and other resources in this area. And they established probably settlements. Perhaps they were here part of the time and were traveling to other areas other parts of the time. No, there you go. But they did build, the center of their empire was near here on Mound Key, which is an island in Estero Bay that is now an archaeological state park. It's called Mound Key Archaeological State Park. Can be visited by boat. And they started with what was probably an oyster bar and built it up over centuries with bringing in sand and with the seashells and refuse, bones from fish they caught. Wow. They dug canals, and that became the center of their empire. And they had a king who reigned over it. And apparently they were very productive, and they dominated other native groups that were around the area. So once the Spanish found Florida, that was kind of the beginning of the end for the Calusa, because good old Hernando Cortez was looking for gold. I believe it was called El Dorado. He had heard there was a kingdom with lots of gold somewhere in Florida. Wasn't here. But they came ashore, brought all those fine diseases that the Europeans brought to the Americas. And they also enslaved as many of the Calusa as they could and sent them to work in various places. And gradually, through disease and just occupation by other groups, they were eliminated over time. And then after that, really, Fort Myers Beach in this area was very sparsely populated and seasonally populated, I guess you'd say.
Yes, back in the 1600s, Cuban fishermen came down from Havana, and they had these things called ranchos that they developed along the harbors. Mm-hmm. And they were mobile people. They did not settle here. They went from port to port looking for the fish. They would set up temporary camps, and then people they dry their fish out, preserve the fish, and bring it back to Cuba. So they were here for the 1600s, maybe into the 1700s. But development here did not start until mid to late 1800s. There were a few fishermen on Dog Key, some families on Mound Key, but it wasn't until 1898 that we had our first homestead.
Okay. So it's more of a location back then rather than
Right.
living area.
It was a good center for resource
Yes.
extraction,
Yep.
I guess you could say.
Yep.
Yeah, the fishing was very important. And one problem was there wasn't a survey of the island. And when the Homestead Act was enacted in 1862, people got free land, but we had not been surveyed. So we could not homestead until it was late 1870s
Wow.
when it finally got home. We finally got it surveyed so we could have our first homesteader. But
And obviously people were living on the island. They just weren't.
they were called squatters.
Yes. Yep.
Right.
Okay.
And the first official white family was the Sam Ellis family. They settled at the end of Connecticut Street where the Mound House is.
Okay.
And he was George Underhill's stepson. And they actually did their homesteading on Sanibel. But George came back here with his family and raised them on the island.
And of course, Mound House is significant because it is built on a Calusa created mound. Presumably they didn't actually live there, but it was a place where they deposited a lot of what they called kitchen midden material, which is they must have been there perhaps fishing and
Yep.
netting creatures. And then they put the refuse, they deliberately piled up what they had left over and created a sizable mound, which is still there. It's the one remaining native mound that's on this island. There were several.
Yeah.
And there was one at the end of Bahia Villa where the town hall is now. There was one on Mound Street and a few others. But in the early days, I would say in the 30s, 40s, 50s, those were dug up and used for fill to create our streets or to create Estero Boulevard. So archaeology kind of took a hit there, and we don't really know what was in them because it's all under the road somewhere.
So in essence, it was a landfill back then, right?
Right.
Kind of like we have
Yeah.
now.
Right.
You go across Florida, and some of the biggest hills or mountains.
Our land, yes, this is the first land.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Well, the Koreshians were here very early on. Well, not early on, late 1800s. But Cyrus Teed owned a lot of land on the island, and they had a settlement at the south end.
Yeah.
They had a house there and a sawmill. And of the original 7 homesteaders, 5 were Koreshians.
Really?
So Teed would send them down here to homestead the land, and then they would turn the patent over to him, and he would sell it to developers. So he was probably the first developer
Yeah.
owning a big chunk of the island. If you look back at the old deeds, a lot of them originated with the Koreshians.
And you mentioned sawmill. Was there a lot of lumber available around here?
Yes.
That they were
Mahogany and pine,
really.
which are native trees, and I guess they used that to build their settlement they had one on the south end of the island that was kind of not a vacation place, but a place where they had recreation. I believe it was 2 or 3 story wooden house.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they would come in little shallow draft boats and have picnics and swim and so forth. I think the Koreshians were a very interesting group, and they still have a presence in Estero, which is where they were on the island for quite a while, but their main settlement was in Estero, and there's still a state park that you can visit. But they bought up the northern tip at Bowditch Point, and then they bought the southern part of the island for different uses. And then they settled in Estero, and you can now visit the Koreshian State Historic Site with lots of big buildings where they settled, and they were very industrious. This was a group that wanted to create a new Jerusalem in Southwest Florida. They had their own very specific cosmogony or cosmology, and they believed that Cyrus Teed actually was a very interesting guy. He was from New York State, and when he was 30 years old, he had a vision after suffering a severe electrical shock, interestingly, he woke up and had a vision of a beautiful woman who told him the secrets of the universe. And one of the secrets was that we live in a hollow planet. We're on the inside of the planet. And he developed sort of a cult type following and brought all of these wealthy, mostly women from Chicago on a train with grand pianos and trunks full of fine goods. And when they settled in Estero, especially, they built, they had a cement maker. They had a cement factory. They generated their own electricity. They grew lots of crops, and they held concerts and plays, and they brought a level of industry and culture to the wilderness of Estero that had not been there. But they kind of got in trouble with their neighbors because I think Cyrus Teed wanted to take over more land and establish actually a city of their own or a town.
Yeah.
And he got into a fight with some of the locals. He got beat up pretty badly, and 2 years later, he died, probably from some of the results of his injuries that lingered.
They put him in a bathtub because he always said he would rise from the dead. So they had him in a bathtub for, I guess, a week or so. And until it got so bad, they had to do something with him because he wasn't going anywhere. So they put him, they buried him at the end of the south end of the island. And his tomb was there, and they had 24-hour watch on it because they were just waiting for him to pop up. And finally, the 1921 hurricane took him away.
Cement tomb and all.
Wow.
Yeah, no sign of him.
He never came up.
No, we're still waiting for him.
Somewhere out there, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But they were a very interesting part of the local history.
And what happened to the group after that? Kind of...
They hung around for a while, not too long. But the last one, I think, was Hedwig. Was that her name?
I'm not sure, but I wrote an article about this, and it said that the last of the Koreshians died in 1984. They believed in celibacy, except for Cyrus Teed, who had access to partners, female partners. But they believed in celibacy, so they didn't reproduce. There was some disaffection and unhappiness as time went on. And so some of them splintered off, including George Sanders on Fort Myers Beach, who was a Koreshian, broke away from them, and then he founded Sanders Boatyard, which was, it had a long, I believe, like a railway down to the water, a long boat launch, where Publix on Fort Myers Beach and the Snookbite Marina are now. That was Sanders Boatyard.
Wow.
Yeah, he had quite a business. Decades. It was the first grocery store on the island, the first post office. He had a schooner, so he ran supplies back and forth. He had a gasoline-powered schooner of some kind that he brought up. So he had a good business going. He brought a lot of good things to the island because there was nothing else out here,
especially south in the middle of the island, which is where Sanders Boatyard was, and it was still in operation. I know in the late 50s, early 60s,
even in the 70s.
In the 70s,
until Publix came, it was Well, it was been Island Marina for a while.
Actually, that was the first grocery store, and Publix is there now.
Yeah.
So after that, the homesteaders turned some of that area. They sold it off to developers, and early developers were K Subdivision, which was Connecticut Street on either side of it, eucalyptus around where it used to be a telephone company.
Right.
Anyway, so things were starting to happen a little bit until the end of the century. But I do want to talk about the Beach Hotel because that fascinates me. The Beach Hotel was built in 1912.
Right.
Now, in 1912, there was absolutely nothing on this island except probably George Sanders.
Right. Wow.
Okay, and a couple of squatters and the Koreshians. So he had a vision that he could build a hotel that would be a smaller version of what they were doing on the East Coast. And he built the first pier. It was the first dock for getting on and off the island. And that hotel lasted until 1978 or 79 when it was torn down. And that's where, right across from here, it's the Beach Caper
Okay.
condo now.
Wow.
But the beach hotel was the social center of the island all during the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It was run by the Newton family for 4 generations. So,
It's funny. So that used to be the center of the
Yeah.
island. Now it's
Yeah.
down by Times Square, right?
Right.
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 Interesting.
Because you can only get there by boat. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
wherever there was a way to get off the boat, that would be where it would start. So yeah,
And they had a long pier in front of the
Yeah.
hotel that stretched
you can still
west.
see the pilings today.
They're
Really?
still there.
They're still there. Yeah.
Some of them are still there after all these hurricanes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
They built things good back then.
Yes. They
Certainly
rebuilt them a few times, I think.
Well, but still.
But still, yeah.
So that brings us up to the 20s.
The 20s, right?
So we're ready to do that next time.
All right.
Yeah.
That's this. Yeah, this is a great start. I love it. I love learning the history of the island and sharing it with our listeners. And like I said, we've got a lot of new people moving here. You understand? Yeah.
And it's hard for them to imagine what it was like in the late 1800s or even the 1930s when there was no air conditioning.
Yeah.
The mosquitoes could carry
Oh,
you
I'm
away.
sure.
I mean, there were clouds of mosquitoes, lots of wildlife. There was even, yellow fever in the early days of development. It was a tough place to
Yeah.
live. It was a tropical paradise to some degree, and it was also an agricultural site. People did grow
Yeah, there's quite a bit of growth.
pineapples and tomatoes and papayas and mangoes and things on Fort Myers Beach.
Really?
But then there would be a sudden freeze, there'd be a hurricane. And
Yeah.
so it was very cyclical.
Yeah.
Growth, development,
It doesn't
being
grow back
wiped out.
overnight. Yeah.
boom and
Yeah.
bust. Yeah,
Kind of like our orange industry here in Florida.
exactly. Yeah.
Taking a hit over the years. But no, appreciate your time today, and I'm looking forward to, as the series continues, learning more and more about the island and the history behind it. But thank you for being here.
pleasure.
today. Yes.
Thanks for spending this time with the Estero Island Historic Society, where every story is a tide that brings our island's past back to shore. If today's episode sparked a memory or a question, we'd love to hear from you, and we hope you'll visit us at the museum and check out our events on Fort Myers Beach as we keep exploring the journey together. Until we meet again, may the island's history walk with you, one footprint in the sand of time. To hear more episodes in this series, go to esteroislandhistoricsociety.com or fmbgoodneighbor.com.